Hi guys, we're going to start off with our last unit of the school year, which is hard to believe, on an introduction to one variable statistics. So unit 6 is a unit all about one variable statistics, and we're going to get started with some vocabulary that you need for this unit. Okay, there are two main uses of statistics, and we use statistics to describe a set of data and to make predictions about the particular population that we're looking at. So we use statistics to describe and predict. And we get some data, and data is just a collection of data in context. So what does that mean? Well, we're just collecting some data. It could be about an individual, a population of people. We take a sample, and we're collecting data based on a certain variable. What do we want to know about that population? And so our population is the set of individuals that we are describing or making predictions about. So the population can be who was surveyed. So we go to the mall, there's people standing around with clipboards. The population would be the people at South Point Mall on a Saturday afternoon. Then we can take a sample of that population, and a sample is just a subset. It's just a subset of the population of that data. So maybe if they're at the mall taking information, they're just going to look at women or men or children or teenagers. That would be a sample of the particular population of all those people at South Point Mall. So we can take that one step further. We are collecting data about a population. We take a sample of that population, which is parts of that population, male, female, young, old, and then we can take a look at an individual from that sample, and an individual is just a member of the population that we're taking the data about. And then lastly is variable, and the variable is the characteristic that we're recording about each individual in the data set. So we're collecting data from a population of people, we take a sample of that population, we can look at individuals, and when we look at those individuals, what is the characteristic that we are recording for those individuals? So for example, we want to go to the mall, we want to collect data on if shoppers use coupons or not. So we go to our population would be the people at South Point Mall. A sample of that population might be women over 40. An individual might be particular women that they've talked to. And what is the characteristic that we're collecting? Do they collect coupons or not? Or use coupons. So there are two types of variables that we can collect, and one is a variable that records qualities or characteristics, and another one is a variable that measures. So our first characteristic we're going to call categorical, where we put things in a category, and that's a variable that records qualities. Or characteristics of an individual. So for example, we might go to the mall and record, it could be gender, it could be eye color, it could be hair color, so that's a quality or a characteristic. The second type of variable that we can record is called quantitative, and think of quantity as a number. And that is a variable that measures numerically a characteristic of an individual. And if we can find the mean of that, so if we can find an average, can we find the average? Then it's quantitative. If we can't, then it's categorical. And for example, a quantitative variable might be height, it might be age, it could be weight. Those are quantitative characteristics. So there's two ways to describe data. And we're going to look at those ways in this unit. We can describe data graphically, and we can do that with a dot plot, a histogram, and we're going to take a look at all of these in this unit, or a box plot, or what's also called a box and whiskers plot. And then we can also describe data numerically. And we do that by measures of center, and we're going to take a look at those in just a second. What's typical about the data, and then measures of spread, like range. There are two measures of center that we're going to take a look at in this unit particularly. We're going to look at mean, which is the average, add them all up and divide, and we're also going to talk about median, which is the middle value. And I know you know how to do this already, but we're going to take a look at when is it better to use mean, when is it better to use median. And so that's what we're going to take a look at in this unit. And to answer question A, when is median a more accurate measure of a typical piece of data than the mean, we would use median if there are outliers. And we'll talk about what an outlier is in just a second. So we have measures of spread, so how far spread out is the data, and measures of spread are measured three ways in one variable statistics. We can look at the range, which is the difference between the highest and lowest numbers, the IQR, which is the interquartile range, so we're going to be looking at quartiles in this unit. And lastly, we're going to look at standard deviation. So we're going to look at mean absolute deviation and standard deviation. So that's how we would describe data numerically. So graphically, we would be looking at graphs. And these graphs down here are all histograms. And histograms, they look like bar graphs, but bar graphs, the bars do not touch. In a histogram, they do. So if we look at this histogram here and we were to shape the data, this would be called mound-shaped because it looks like a mountain. And we can also call that symmetrical because there's highs in the middle and lows on the left and the right. So when we have extreme lows, in this case, like we do here, this is extreme lows. We call that skewed data, and this would be skewed left because there are low lefts. So it's skewed left. We can also have data that is skewed right, like this example here. So this data is skewed right. And that means that it has extreme high values. And the high values are right here. So it has, this one has low on the right and high on the left. And lastly, we have this graph here, which is uniform. It's pretty much the same height from beginning to end. So when we're describing data, we ask ourselves a couple questions. Question one is the center. What is the most typical data? Do we look at mean? Do we look at median? Are there outliers? Then spread is asking how much do the values vary from the center? Well, the center is either the mean or the median. So we're asking ourselves, how much do the values that we are collecting vary from whatever point or whatever measure we are using for center. And then lastly, are there any outliers? Well, what's an outlier? Outliers are any values that are significantly higher or lower than the rest of the data. So for example, if we are taking looking at the heights of kindergartners, and most kindergartners are probably about 3.5 feet tall, and then we might have a kindergartner that might be really, really tall, it might be 4.5 feet tall. That kindergartner would be considered an outlier. So we've reformatted our notes a little bit differently this time. On the bottom of your notes page, you'll see a spot to answer video question number 1 and a spot to answer video question number 2. Please, you can go ahead and answer your questions there. I am not going to do a Google form for this unit, but video question number 1 and video question number 2 will be answered at the bottom of your paper. So here are video question 1 and 2. Describe the data below. Is this data skewed right with extreme highs, skewed right with extreme lows, skewed left with extreme highs, or skewed left with extreme lows? Number 2, is the following scenario categorical or quantitative? The month you were born in. So are you measuring a characteristic or are you measuring a quantity? So is it categorical or quantitative? That's it. No Google form for tonight, but what I will do is put up a Google form if you have questions. So if you have questions about this particular video, I will put a Google form up for that, but you do not need to answer questions number 1 and number 2. Have a good night.